For centuries, the story of rising and established powers was written in blood. Nations competed for dominance through military conquest, expanding their territory and influence at the point of a sword. The path to greatness was paved with battlefields, and the ultimate measure of a country's strength was its ability to defeat its rivals in open conflict. This was the old game, a brutal but straightforward contest where military might was the final arbiter. This logic guided empires from Rome to Britain, and it defined the catastrophic world wars of the 20th century. The goal was simple: win the war, seize the territory, and dictate the terms of peace to the vanquished. But the dawn of the nuclear age fundamentally altered this ancient calculus. The development of atomic and thermonuclear weapons created a paradox. Military technology had become so powerful, so utterly destructive, that its use in a full-scale conflict between major powers was no longer a viable option. Such a war would not produce a winner and a loser. It would result in mutual annihilation, a lose-lose scenario for everyone on the planet. This terrifying reality forced a profound shift in how great powers compete. The primary arena of confrontation moved away from the battlefield, which had become too dangerous, and onto a new, more complex terrain where the weapons are different. In this new era, which truly took shape after World War II, the path to global influence is no longer through military expansion. Instead, it is paved with economic growth, technological innovation, and financial leverage. A nation's power is now measured less by the number of its tanks and warships, and more by the size of its GDP, the reach of its corporations, and its role in global supply chains. A strong military still serves a crucial purpose. It acts as a shield, protecting a nation's economic interests and deterring aggression. But it is no longer the primary tool for advancing a country's status on the world stage. The new game is one of geoeconomics. This transformation means that the rivalry between the United States and China today is fundamentally different from the historical clashes of empires. It is not a prelude to an inevitable war for territorial control. Instead, it is a long-term competition for economic leadership, technological supremacy, and the power to shape the rules of the global system. Both nations understand that a direct military conflict would be catastrophic, so they have channeled their competitive energies into the economic sphere. This is the new battlefield, where trade deficits are more significant than troop deployments and investment treaties are more impactful than military alliances. The contest is no less intense, but the rules have completely changed. The Cold War is often remembered as a military standoff, a tense, decades-long confrontation between two nuclear-armed superpowers. We think of the arms race, proxy wars in distant lands, and the constant threat of nuclear Armageddon. While the military dimension was undeniably central, the ultimate victory was not won on a battlefield. The United States triumphed over the Soviet Union not just because of its military superiority, but because of its vastly more successful economic strategy. Washington understood that the contest was as much about winning hearts and minds through prosperity as it was about building a bigger arsenal. This insight proved to be the decisive factor in the conflict's outcome. After World War II, the United States spearheaded the creation of the Bretton Woods system. This framework established institutions like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which later became the World Trade Organization. This was more than just an economic plan, it was a brilliant strategic move. By creating a global network for development and trade centered on the US dollar and American markets, Washington built a coalition of allies bound together by shared prosperity. Nations in Western Europe and Asia were rebuilt and integrated into a system that offered them a path to economic growth, stability, and a better life for their citizens. In stark contrast, the Soviet Union pursued a strategy that was almost entirely focused on military power. It poured its resources into its armed forces and its nuclear arsenal, attempting to match the United States plane for plane and missile for missile. While it succeeded in becoming a military superpower, this came at a ruinous cost. The Soviet command economy could not deliver prosperity to its own people, let alone to its satellite states. Its allies were held in the block by force, not by the promise of a better future. The system lacked the dynamism and appeal of the Western economic model, and over time it crumbled under its own weight. Ultimately, the Soviet Union did not collapse because of a military defeat. It bankrupted itself in a futile attempt to keep pace with an adversary that was playing a different, smarter game. The United States demonstrated that a thriving, open economic system was a more powerful and sustainable tool of grand strategy than a closed, militarized one. It won the Cold War by building a world that other countries wanted to join, a world based on economic opportunity rather than ideological coercion. This lesson, that economic strength is the true foundation of long-term global power, was not lost on the rest of the world, especially not on an observant and ambitious China. The lessons of the post-war era were not only defined by the superpower rivalry. Several other nations provided powerful case studies demonstrating that economic development, not military might, was the new key to national greatness. Japan, a nation utterly defeated and demilitarized after World War II, emerged as a stunning example of this principle. Under the security umbrella provided by the United States, Japan was able to pour all of its national energy and resources into economic reconstruction and industrial growth. It became a manufacturing powerhouse, dominating global markets in electronics and automobiles, and achieved the status of a major world power with only a minimal military force for self-defense. Another compelling blueprint came from South Korea. Following the devastating Korean War, the country was one of the poorest in the world. Its northern neighbor, North Korea, maintained a massive military and adopted a military-first policy. South Korea, under the leadership of General Park Chung-hee, chose a different path. It prioritized economic development above all else, fostering powerful industrial conglomerates and focusing on export-led growth. The results of this strategic choice have been nothing short of astonishing. Today, South Korea's economy is a global force, roughly 50 times larger than that of North Korea, which remains impoverished and isolated despite its nuclear weapons and massive army. The pattern repeated itself elsewhere in Asia. In Indonesia, after a period of aggressive territorial claims and confrontation with its neighbors, a strategic shift occurred in 1966. The new leadership turned the nation's focus inward toward economic development and regional cooperation. This change in strategy not only stabilized the country, but also transformed it into the respected leader of Southeast Asia and a significant player on the global stage. These examples, from Japan to South Korea to Indonesia, reinforced a powerful narrative. Countries that prioritized economic growth over military adventurism were the ones that truly thrived in the post-war world. They became influential, respected, and prosperous. These success stories provided a clear and compelling roadmap for any nation with ambitions of rising in the international order. The formula was clear: secure your borders, de-emphasize military expansion, and channel your national will into building a powerful modern economy. This was the proven path to becoming a great power in the new era. It was a model that did not rely on conquering neighbors, but on outcompeting them in the global marketplace. This was the blueprint that a pragmatic and forward-thinking leader in China would soon adopt, setting the stage for the most dramatic economic transformation in human history. China, under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping in the late 1970s and 1980s, was a keen observer of these global trends. Deng understood the lessons of the Cold War and the success of his Asian neighbors. He recognized that the Soviet model of prioritizing military power at the expense of economic health was a dead end. He also saw how Japan and South Korea had transformed themselves into economic giants by focusing their energies on development. Drawing from these examples, Deng made a pivotal strategic decision. China would set aside its ideological fervor and military ambitions to focus single-mindedly on economic growth. It was a move that would change the world. To achieve this, Deng initiated a series of bold reforms known as reform and opening up. He deliberately cut the military share of the national budget, reducing its political influence and redirecting those precious resources toward building the economy. He also moved to settle 17 of China's 23 outstanding territorial disputes with its neighbors. The goal was to create a stable and peaceful external environment that would allow China to concentrate on its domestic economic agenda without distraction. This was a radical departure from the revolutionary zeal of the Mao era. Instead of exporting revolution, China would now focus on exporting goods. Its new mantra was "Hide your strength, bide your time." The results of this strategic pivot were breathtaking. For the next 3 decades, China's economy grew at an astounding pace, lifting hundreds of millions of its citizens out of poverty in the greatest such reduction in human history. It became the world's factory, integrating itself into global supply chains and accumulating vast wealth. This economic miracle preceded its military modernization. It was only after China had built a formidable economic base that it began to significantly invest in building a world-class military. This sequencing was crucial. Economic power was the foundation upon which its future military and geopolitical influence would be built. China followed the post-war playbook to perfection. This patient, decades-long strategy allowed China to emerge as a true peer competitor to the United States without firing a shot. It didn't need to conquer territory to become a great power. It achieved that status by becoming an indispensable part of the global economy. By the 21st century, China had successfully accumulated the economic strength, technological prowess, and financial resources to assert itself on the world stage. It had mastered the new game of geoeconomics, learning from the successes of the United States and its allies, and was now ready to challenge the very system that had enabled its rise. As China was mastering the game of geoeconomics, the United States seemed to be, well, forgetting its own winning formula. In the years following the Cold War, and especially after the attacks of September 11, 2001, U.S. foreign policy became, increasingly militarized. The focus shifted heavily toward counterterrorism and military interventions in the Middle East. While these were definitely pressing concerns, this hyper-focus came at the expense of the other tools of national power: diplomacy, economic statecraft, and information influence. The U.S. began to view global problems primarily through a military lens, often reaching for a hammer when, honestly, a different tool was needed. This over-reliance on military solutions led to some critical strategic errors. A telling example occurred in 2012 at Scarborough Shoal, a feature in the South China Sea claimed by the Philippines, a treaty ally of the United States. When China asserted control over the shoal, the U.S., despite having overwhelming military superiority in the region, failed to intervene decisively. This inaction sent a powerful signal that America's military guarantees were not absolute, undermining the confidence of its allies. In the same year, the United States broke with its traditional, even-handed policy on the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands dispute by siding emphatically with Japan. A move that, frankly, needlessly antagonized China and ceded the initiative in a volatile situation. Beyond these specific incidents, a more systemic problem was sort of taking hold in Washington. The non-military instruments of American power were allowed to atrophy. Successive Congresses refused to approve capital increases for the World Bank and the IMF, the very institutions the U.S. had created to project its influence. The budget for the State Department was gutted, leading military leaders like General James Mattis to famously quip that, "If you don't fund the State Department fully, I need to buy more ammunition." The U.S. Information Agency, a key tool for communicating America's message during the Cold War, was eliminated. Foreign aid programs were truncated, leaving a vacuum in global development. This neglect of its diplomatic and economic toolkit created an opening that China was more than willing to fill. While America was spending trillions on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, China was spending trillions on building roads, ports, and digital networks across the world. The United States, the architect of the post-war economic order, was increasingly absent from the new game of global development and infrastructure. It was still the world's preeminent military power, but it was failing to compete effectively on the economic battlefield where, honestly, the future of global influence was truly being decided. Into the vacuum left by the United States, China launched its own ambitious vision for global order, the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Unveiled back in 2013, the BRI is a colossal infrastructure and development project aimed at connecting Asia with Africa and Europe, both over land and by sea. It's in many ways a modern-day version of the Marshall Plan and the Bretton Woods system, but honestly, on a much grander scale and with distinctly Chinese characteristics. Through the BRI, China offers to build and finance everything from railways and ports to power plants and telecommunications networks in developing countries all around the world. This initiative is really China's primary tool of geoeconomic statecraft. It involves creating new development banks like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank to rival institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF. The BRI seeks to set new technical and engineering standards, and it promotes trade liberalization on terms that are favorable to Beijing. In a sense, the BRI is a constructive theft of American intellectual property, the idea of using economic development to build a sphere of influence. Right now it's the big game in global economics, with a special focus on Central Asia, the Middle East and Africa, regions that are hungry for the kind of infrastructure investment China is offering. For a lot of developing nations, the BRI is a very attractive proposition. They need the infrastructure China is willing to build, and Beijing often provides financing with fewer strings attached, especially when it comes to governance or human rights, compared to Western lenders. By becoming the primary builder and banker for much of the developing world, China isn't just pouring concrete, it's building influence, securing access to resources, and creating new markets for its own companies. It's methodically wiring a huge portion of the globe into a new, Sino-centric economic system, putting itself right at the heart of future global trade and commerce. The American response to this grand strategic play has been, well, largely ineffective. For the most part, the United States has chosen to stand on the sidelines and complain, warning countries about the dangers of debt-trap diplomacy and the poor quality of Chinese projects. While some of these criticisms are definitely valid, they just aren't a substitute for a compelling alternative. By failing to offer a better vision for global development, the United States often looks like it's trying to hold other countries back, rather than helping them move forward. As a result, China continues to win friends and influence nations, one port and one railway at a time. Despite the impressive scale of its ambitions, China's path to global leadership is not without significant obstacles. The Belt and Road Initiative, while vast, has also been plagued by problems. Some partner countries have become wary of the massive debts they're accumulating, leading to accusations of debt-trap diplomacy. China's aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy, and its use of economic coercion against countries like Australia and Lithuania, have made many nations nervous about becoming too dependent on Beijing. This has actually damaged China's reputation as a reliable partner, and has generated a growing international backlash against its methods. Furthermore, China's record on honoring international agreements is coming under intense scrutiny. Its crackdown on freedoms in Hong Kong, in violation of the one country, two systems principle promised in the Sino-British Joint Declaration, has raised serious questions about its willingness to abide by its commitments. This has really undermined trust, which is a critical currency in international relations. Moreover, China may have overestimated its own financial resources. The sheer cost of the BRI is immense, and as its own economy slows down, Beijing may find it increasingly difficult to sustain the level of investment it's promised to the world. Internally, China faces a host of daunting challenges. After decades of miraculous growth, its economy is now slowing significantly. This is due to a combination of factors, including mismanagement of the property sector, a turn inward under President Xi Jinping, and a policy of giving Communist Party committees the final say over private business decisions. This prioritization of political control over market efficiency is really stifling the dynamism that powered China's rise. Many experts believe that China will struggle to sustain even 3% annual growth after 2030, which is a far cry from the double-digit rates of its past. President Xi Jinping's strategy of maximizing political control is fundamentally at odds with economic vitality. Elite opinion within China is increasingly critical, with many feeling that his policies are actually taking the country backward. The country's demographic headwinds, including a shrinking workforce and a rapidly aging population, will only add to these economic pressures. China is not destined for inevitable, unending growth. It's a powerful nation, but it's also a brittle one, facing profound economic and political challenges that could severely constrain its global ambitions in the years to come. Despite the escalating rivalry, one of the most defining features of the US-China relationship is the deep and complex web of economic interdependence that binds the two nations together. This is not a new Cold War, where two separate, sealed-off blocks faced each other. Instead, the American and Chinese economies are profoundly intertwined. For a lot of major US industries, from automotive and aviation to entertainment and luxury goods, the Chinese market isn't just important, it's absolutely essential for their profitability and survival. During the 2007 to 2008 global financial crisis, for example, robust sales in China were a critical factor in saving General Motors from collapse. This economic collaboration, while definitely fraught with tension, has produced immense benefits for both sides. It's driven global economic growth, lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and helped usher in the post-industrial service economy in the United States by providing consumers with low-cost goods. While American politicians often blame China for the loss of manufacturing jobs, the reality is a lot more complex. Automation has actually been a much larger driver of these job losses than trade. In fact, while the US struggled to manage the loss of about 3 million manufacturing jobs over a decade, China successfully managed the dislocation of 45 million state enterprise workers in an earlier period by actively helping them find new work. Beyond economics, the US and China also share a surprising number of national security interests. On the Korean Peninsula, both countries have a stated goal of denuclearization, and their objectives overlap by an estimated 90 to 95%. In the Middle East, stability is arguably more critical for China than it is for the United States, given China's much greater dependence on the region's oil exports to fuel its economy. As China's global footprint grows, so does its stake in maintaining the stability of the global commons, from which it benefits enormously. The two powers also face a range of common transnational threats that neither can solve alone. They've even collaborated in efforts to combat piracy off the coast of Africa, ensuring the safety of vital shipping lanes. More importantly, both nations face the existential threat of climate change. After years of being the world's largest polluter, China is now a global leader in environmental spending and the production of green energy technology. Addressing long-term challenges like climate change and global pandemics will be impossible without some level of cooperation between Washington and Beijing. Their fates, and honestly, the world's, are inextricably linked. The reality of the 21st century is that the United States has a true peer competitor for the first time in decades. The era of unchallenged American dominance is over. The US must accept that it cannot, and really should not, seek to contain or cripple China. The future isn't about a decisive victory but about permanent competition. This is a contest that's going to be managed, not won. Neither side can achieve complete dominance over the other, and any attempt to do so would risk catastrophic conflict. The central challenge for both nations is to compete smartly and responsibly, without letting rivalry spiral into open hostility. To succeed in this new era, the United States must relearn the lessons of its own past success. It just can't afford to keep relying too much on military power while neglecting the other instruments of national influence. In peacetime, resource allocation in Washington is often driven not by grand strategy, but by the powerful lobbying of the military-industrial complex. This creates a dangerous imbalance. The US must recognize that the primary battlefield is now economic and technological, and it has to reinvest in the tools needed to compete effectively on that terrain. This means revitalizing American diplomacy, development aid, and information strategy. This requires a whole-of-government approach, what strategists often call DIME, using all four instruments of national power: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. The diplomatic corps needs to be rebuilt and empowered. America must once again champion a positive economic vision for the world, offering a compelling alternative to China's state-led model. The military should be postured as a strong shield, deterring aggression while creating space for economic and diplomatic tools to do their work. And the US must compete fiercely in the technological arena, investing in research, innovation, and education to maintain its edge. This is not a call for a new Cold War, it's a call for a smarter, more balanced form of competition. The US and China are locked in a complex relationship of simultaneous cooperation and competition. They have to find ways to challenge each other in areas of disagreement, while still working together on shared challenges like climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation. Playing this new game effectively requires discipline, strategic foresight, and a renewed commitment to all the strengths, not just the military ones, that once made America the undisputed leader of the free world. The security and prosperity of both nations, and honestly of the world, depend on it.